This is the battleground where the Americans found themselves at war. Today, the Somali capital, Mogadishu, remains dangerous and tense. Militiamen like these, loyal to the warlord General Aidid, rule the streets. Despite American intervention, these men could easily push the country back into civil war. It's feared mistakes made in Somalia could jeopardize other peace missions elsewhere. This is the story of what went wrong.
The images of brutal starvation are so painful. The children are so frail, so innocent. Reach out. You have the power to help relieve tremendous suffering. Don't turn away from these innocent girls and boys. Join our emergency phone list now and change the faces of starvation into the beginning of hope. Call that way.
It started 18 months ago. The images of famine shocked America, but gunmen in Somalia were preventing food convoys reaching the starving. President Bush had resisted sending troops to Bosnia, but his advisors thought there was a chance of saving lives in Somalia without getting enmeshed in a war. The United Nations didn't have the military muscle and was lobbying America.
I remember Dr. Scali, in fact, telling the president that there was a perception in much of the third world, especially the Islamic world, that the West was using the UN for its own purposes, and that when we wanted to intervene, then the UN intervened. When we didn't, then nothing was done. And this was an opportunity to then a very poor third world country, but a Muslim country and a black country.
The world could not stand by and allow hundreds of thousands of people to die in Somalia. We had a responsibility. We're a great nation. Peacekeeping is an important responsibility. I felt that it was important for us to engage in. I think that we took the moral high ground during that period.
The White House, under pressure from politicians, the public, and the press, finally decided to send in troops.
Only the United States has the global reach to place a large security force on the ground in such a distant place quickly and efficiently, and thus save thousands of innocents from death.
The United Nations gave America unique powers to intervene. They authorized the use of military force, even though the country they were going to had not invited them.
I believe it was an historical resolution. It was a very important resolution. It reinforced the United Nations, it reinforced the new role of the United Nations, and will help the Somali people. In the case of Somalia, we have a territory, we have a population, but we have no government. And this is why we were, in a certain way, compelled to intervene. Without the agreement of the government, we obtained the agreement of certain gangs, certain groups, but there was no government.
The brightest and the best were drafted in. The operation took just weeks to plan. It started with the best of intentions to feed the starving people of Somalia. But the powers that be in Washington could not have realized that in the months that followed, the focus of the mission would shift, and hundreds of Somalis and scores of peacekeeping servicemen would lose their lives. The small mistakes made in Somalia would have serious implications for peacekeeping missions elsewhere. The country the U.S. troops were coming to was locked in civil war. The various clans were slugging it out for supreme power. Each warlord, like a medieval baron, had his own private army. The gunmen robbed food convoys. They demanded extortionate amounts of protection money to let them through. The starving were not being fed. The U.S. Secretary of State himself remembers laying down the ground rules on how America would deal with the militiamen.
I think I made it clear that we were prepared to engage in disarming to the point necessary to accomplish the feeding of the people. In other words, there was going to have to be some security established on the ground if we were going to be successful in feeding people. But that was the end of it. We were not there particularly or principally to disarm the contending party.
A former ambassador to Somalia was sent ahead as America's special envoy to broker a ceasefire. He confronted the various warlords separately with an offer they could hardly refuse.
I said, look, the world is now coming, led by the United States, to try to prevent this country from committing suicide. We already have 300,000 people killed. The country is in ruins. The international community will come in and help you. And the President of the United States is determined to do this. And we want to do it peacefully, but you understand the military capability of the United States. You saw it in Desert Storm, and it's going to be here in 2 days. And you'll have your alternative of working with the international community and cooperating with us while facing very tough, very powerful military pressure, which will overwhelm you. And what's the choice?
One man controlled the vital port and airport districts where the troops would land. The powerful warlord General Mohammed Farah Aidid. Most Americans had scarcely heard of him, but this man more than any other would damage their mission. We found General Aidid in a luxury hotel in Kenya completing a foreign tour. He told us how 15 months ago he welcomed the announcement the Americans were coming.
When this announcement was done, we Somalis believed it, and we welcome.
Operation Restore Hope began auspiciously. The Marines landed in a blaze of publicity. Even in this far corner of the world, the international press has been forewarned. A group of soldiers captured the first Somalis they encountered. Only to discover they were in fact legitimate workers from the airport. In all, more than 20,000 troops were sent to Somalia. It was just before Christmas, and they were welcomed by crowds of people weary of famine and war.
Streets of Mogadishu were littered with people, brightly coloured clothes, rice was being thrown, women were ululating, every wall along the airport and seaport was just covered with young children, men. Just absolutely everybody was ecstatic.
Never in the history of this short episode would Americans be so popular here. Nearing the end of his presidency, it was a last hurrah for George Bush.
People believed that food would be brought into the country, jobs would be created, the commercial marketplace would be revitalized, and that some form of political reconciliation would happen sooner rather than later.
But that was not what the Americans planned. In those early days, the troops had a clear objective: to open the roads and get food through, and then go home. The United Nations also wanted them to disarm the militiamen, but America did not want to be drawn into confrontation.